All right, we're going to talk about some aerodynamic factors, particulars, and nuances of multi-engine aircraft. Before we do that, though, let's review a little bit about our single-engine aircraft and build off of what we're already familiar with. So, a new concept, a new term that we're going to talk about today is the critical engine. We are going to review P factor, and in particular the left turning tendencies of aircraft. These still all apply to multi-engine aircraft, but we should probably review our single engine, what we're familiar with in the first place. So now I am going to attempt to be an artist and draw an airplane. It's not going to work very well, but so be it. That is our wing. This is our engine. This is our propeller. You can tell it's in need of an overhaul. It's kind of bent. And here we're going back to our horizontal and vertical stabilizer. Wow, that is really bad. So be it. Where on an airplane does force act upon? How do I put that better? What point on an aircraft does all force travel through, I should say, or the effects felt upon? What I'm trying to get at is the center of gravity, right? We know that the center of gravity is that point where the aircraft, in theory, you could balance it on that point. All the left and right forces are equal, all the front to back are equal, and if it was structurally possible, we could balance this aircraft on the center of gravity. If I push back on the right wing here, it's going to spin to the right on the center of gravity. If I push down on the nose, the tail is going to come up through the center of gravity. So that's an important concept that we have to remind ourselves of. Okay? So, thinking about it, you're on the runway, you apply full power, what happens? You have to apply right rudder. If you don't, your aircraft is going to go veer off to the left. Here's our runway, and you're going to be in the grass. Why does that happen? Let's think about it. First reason is spiraling slipstream. Spiraling slipstream, right? As we view the propeller from the cockpit, it turns to the right. So let me draw a propeller. Wow. It rotates clockwise, right? So the propeller turns to the right. What does that do? It creates a slipstream that wraps itself around the fuselage of the aircraft and strikes the rear tail, the vertical stabilizer. As it strikes the tail here, that causes the aircraft to yaw to the left. It yaws to the left through the vertical axis. Okay, this is our propeller. Vertical axis goes through the propeller, through the middle of the aircraft. The lateral axis through the wings, and the longitudinal axis through the middle of the fuselage. Okay, so the spiraling slipstream from this accelerated air strikes the left side of the rudder, vertical stabilizer, turns our aircraft to the left. We apply right rudder, we bring it back to the right. That's number one. Number two, torque. We know that Newton's third law of motion says for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So as our propeller is turning to the right, that's wanting to cause the aircraft to roll to the left. What stops that? Well, we have landing gear here and here and here that don't allow the aircraft to roll to the left on the ground. Now when we're in the air, absolutely there's nothing to prevent us, but Just as a side note, sometimes you might see more wear on the left tire than the right. That's why. That's because this torque effect is pushing the aircraft to the left as the propeller rotates to the right. Okay, so that's a left turning tendency. We apply right rudder and we counteract it. Third, gyroscopic precession. As a gyroscope moves through space, any force that you put on it is felt 90 degrees and ahead of the force that was applied. All right, so what does that do? That causes our airplane to turn to the left also as this descending blade creates thrust. All right. The last one, give me just a second to think about it, is asymmetric loading of the propeller, which I just barely mentioned, didn't I? So when we increase this angle of attack of a propeller, and I'm going to greatly exaggerate this. It's our spinner. When we increase the angle of attack, we do what? We increase lift. A propeller is really just a wing, is it not? It's an airfoil, and we create thrust by creating lift. That lift is mostly in parallel to the longitudinal axis of the aircraft, which is what pulls us forward through the air. Okay? So as we increase this angle of attack and the relative wind striking the propeller, the descending blade, or this area over here, this descending blade is creating more lift than the ascending blade. Descending blade, ascending blade. What is that doing? With this thrust being out away from the longitudinal axis, it's trying to turn us to the left. Right rudder brings us back to the right. Okay? So the concepts, if you understand all of this, you're going to understand the multi-engine side of the world, but it's just a little bit different. It's more pronounced, to be honest, is what it is. So, again, I'm not an artist, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Here is our wing. Okay? Somewhere in here is the middle. We're going to have a fuselage. This is a fast airplane because look how sleek it is. We're going to have a horizontal tail. It's all beat up. And we're going to have the vertical stabilizer. This multi-engine airplane has two engines, obviously. One here, one here. It's not very even, but you get the idea. Propeller, propeller. All right? Let's call our center of gravity right here. Nice and standard and within limits. So, let's introduce this concept of critical engine. Again, in North America, we talked about it already, the propellers turn to the right as viewed from the cockpit. Right? So the propellers are turning this way and this way. Some airplanes do have counter-rotating propellers where they turn opposite of each other. Left one turns to the right one turns to the left, and they counteract each other. All right? So, but most aircraft do not have that. Most will turn to the right as viewed from the cockpit. So, let's think about this idea of losing an engine. If we lose the right engine, all right, we have thrust coming off of all four sides of the propellers. Quite a bit of the lift generated by the wing is through this accelerated slipstream produced by these propellers. These propellers for multi-engine aircraft are on the wing itself. It covers a lot of the area of the wing as opposed to the single engine which is mostly wing, up top, and then the engine out front. So a lot of our lift is developed by the thrust by the propellers producing this accelerated slipstream. So back to what I was saying. We lose the right engine, all right? If we lose the right engine in most, again, light twins, we're going to lose not 50% of our available thrust and lift. We're going to lose 80 to 90%. So what do we have to do? We have to pitch up. And we're going to talk about how to mitigate the effects of losing an engine in another video. But I want to talk about the aerodynamics and what's going on so we can solve it later on. But suffice it to say that we're going to increase the angle of attack of this wing so that we don't crash and die. Or we can extend our landing options to somewhere a little bit further in the distance. As we increase the angle of attack, what did we say over here on the single engine airplane? This descending blade is going to produce more thrust because it has a higher angle of attack than this ascending blade. All right? You can see that this thrust vector is not in line with our longitudinal axis of the airplane. It's somewhere out here on the left wing. Whereas on our single engine airplane, it was, inches, maybe a foot or so. This multi-engine airplane, it's way out here. And anytime you have a thrust or a vector, force vector, and you have an arm to the center of gravity, we have what's called a moment. And the multiplication of these two will give us the value of that moment. So let's pick an arbitrary number, all right? It doesn't matter what the value is because this is just conceptual. Let's say that we produce a value of 2 with this left engine at 100% full power on the descending blade. Let's say that the distance from this thrust vector to the center of gravity is also 2. It could be 3, it could be 4, it doesn't matter. So our moment for the left engine is going to be equal to 4, right? Now, what is that going to do? That's going to cause our aircraft to yaw to the left because it's acting on this arm here, right? Now, it's going to do some other things, but let's take this one step at a time. So, our moment is 4 with our left engine inoperative. Okay, let's restore that left engine, cruising along, 100% power both aircraft or both engines, and we lose the left engine. All right, ascending blade, descending blade. Okay, there's our arm. We're still producing 2. Even though I drew the arrow bigger, it doesn't matter. We're still producing 100% power because they're the same kinds of engine. So we're producing 2. But you can see that this descending blade is way farther from the center of gravity than this one is on the left. Let's say it's even just a little bit. Let's say it's 4. So the moment for the right engine is going to be 8. Let's make it 3, okay? It's going to be 6. Regardless of the numbers, this right engine is going to cause a stronger turning moment to the left than the left engine will. Therefore, the left engine is the critical engine. If we lose the left engine, we're in more trouble than if we lost the right engine. Now, that's just the longitudinal axis. I'm sorry, that's the vertical axis. We're going to turn to the left about the vertical axis. We are going to roll to the left about the longitudinal axis. Why? Because we're producing more lift over on this wing. Remember what I said? Most of the lift generated by wings on multi-engine aircraft are from the accelerated slipstream. So the right wing is going to produce more lift. It's going to want to roll to the left through the longitudinal axis. What about the lateral axis? Through the wings. Well, we're controlling that. We're going to pitch up, because if we don't, we're pitching down, and that's not what we want. And the pitching up movement is what causes this asymmetrical thrust to happen, right? So we'll talk again about how to counteract this in the next video, but I just want you to understand the dynamics, the physics going on here, how the left engine is labeled the critical engine, how the right engine is acting on the airframe, and all the physics behind this. One last point I want to make, and this goes to center of gravity. We know that we can load this airplane 100 different ways, and the POH has a envelope, right? Most of them look kind of like this or something on the graph. We've all seen those. Why is it important to stay within that flight envelope? Well, because this rudder right here, this is how we counteract this thrust vector. This is how we counteract our yawing moment to the left and bring us back to the right so that we can go straight ahead. If this center of gravity is too far back, and I'm going to really exaggerate it here because I want to make a point. When we input rudder, let's say we want the rudder to turn this way, right? So that it rotates our nose back to the right. All forces act through the center of gravity. This is not a very large arm for this rudder to turn the aircraft. There's not much strength there. It's like using a small lever to lift a large boulder. And this thrust vector over here on the descending blade could easily outpower or overpower the rudder's ability to turn the aircraft if we have a very short arm over here. That's why we need to keep this center of gravity within the parameters that are established by the POH. Now, the aircraft is tested for this condition, this velocity, minimum airspeed, minimum controllable airspeed. We're going to talk about that next video. With the CG in the aft position, because that's the worst case scenario, right? If we're full aft CG, that's the shortest arm for the rudder. And if we can still control the aircraft, if we can still bring it back to straight with the full aft CG, then we're okay, right? We can certainly do it if it's further up ahead here because we have a longer arm. But if we can do it back here, we're in good shape. So that is asymmetrical thrust in a nutshell. That's how multi-engine aircraft are different than single-engine aircraft. And this right here is what we always have to be cognizant of and always ready for. Loss of this critical engine and our immediate response to the right engine over here.